And we're back on another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, I just messed up, and it's live now, so I don't know if I was actually recording. Hashtag so pro. So we're back on another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, where we have a casual and informal conversation about Star Trek. We're focused on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and today's episode is the Outcast, and I'm joined by my friend Jared Klein. Jared, how are you?
Yes. I'm happy to be here. It's been a long time coming. It's been in the works. Our agents finally put this together, and our free time finally opened up, and we're out here.
You're allowed to go by your name, but you're also allowed to have a Star Trek handle on the show. And I was thinking, since you texted me earlier, I think your nickname should be the Commander.
Okay, I'm all about that. I think.
All right,
I'm game.
That's awesome, because that's Commander Riker that you're referring to. But I kind of was like, oh, he is just the commander.
I'll take it. Yeah, that episode was clearly all about him, but I'm sure we'll get into all that.
We'll definitely get into that. I just want to start out by saying thank you for coming on the show. We're like 100-something episodes in, so it's pretty cool that you're a part of this journey of mine. To give you a little background, I know we've talked about it before a little bit, but I started this 2 years ago just because I love Star Trek and I love talking about it. And so awesome. It's turned into a thing. So it goes on YouTube, and now it's also on podcasts, and we have like something like 200 actual people that like care about it. So it's kind of a neat thing. Yeah, it's like not bad. Awesome. I mean, 200 people. It's like, I mean, I'm not Cardi B, but I want to be the Cardi B of Star Trek. So I'm totally working on that.
This is like Pottermore. It's like the equivalent.
It is. It's true. It's true. So I was really curious when you were wanting to be on the show, because I thought, oh, this is great. But what was even more cool was that you don't really have a lot of experience with Star Trek, right? Like you never watched it.
First episode ever.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like, definitely, I think my only experience was like I'd be flipping through the channels and I would see a Star Trek episode, and I was probably too young. And at the same time, I was like, all right, this has been going on for a long time. You can't just like hop into an episode. So I never kind of like found myself, because I wanted to start from scratch or the beginning. And then when this came about, I was like, okay, I can go for one episode, see what this is all about, because I've been thinking about it for quite some time. I thought that one time I'd like stumble upon it and actually just like watch the show, like most people that stumble upon shows, but I just never end up like falling into it. So this was the opportunity presented itself. I had to take advantage of it.
That's pretty rad. I have a question for you. What were you doing in 1992?
Oh my God. So that's funny. When I looked up the episode, I looked up the date. That was like the first thing I found. March 16th, 1992. I was 2 years old.
Oh my gosh. You are, oh wow, that's crazy. Okay, so what's fascinating about that is like when this episode came out, like it was super controversial for a bunch of different reasons, but now like
of course, yeah.
30 years later, no, it can't be. It's not 30 years later. It's like many years later, almost 30 years later. There's a whole new thing that's emerged in our society that wasn't really like a known thing at the time of this episode, which is gender non-binary like people. There's like
that. Yeah, it's way ahead of its time. Was like what I was going to say. Yeah.
When the episode came out, the actual intention, from what I read about it, was that they were trying to address like homosexual rights, like gay rights, basically, or LGBTQ is like actually a better way of putting it. But like just any non-normative sections of society, rights. And I thought, well, we'll talk about how the episode did just for that, but I thought it was interesting that like to do it in that time, like where if you had like an actual male actor playing with another male actor, it would have been like no, it would never have gotten on the air, right? So that they cast like they went with this idea of like this non-gender thing because they thought, oh well, that's alien, like on Earth, most people, like 99.9% at the time, were thought to be like, binary. So they're like, this will be far out. And then also it's all played by women, so they can like, have makeout scenes with them, and stuff like that. So I thought that was hilarious. But then like all these years later, it's like there's like a whole huge movement about non-binarism. So I have a lot of questions to see what you think about that. But going back into it, into like your introduction, you also haven't really seen Starfleet Boy except for like here and there, right? So let me give you the lay of the land. We do a little episode summary, and you're welcome to do it, which I think would be awesome, but you don't have to. I can do it.
Okay.
And then we just jump right into the discussion, and then we rate the episode on a scale of 1 to 10. And we don't have to, but you could justify your rating, and then that's it. The episode's over. So anything's on the table. You can talk about anything, and I'm sure you have a lot of Star Trek questions, and I encourage you to ask them, because for first-time viewers like yourself, this is the episode I'm going to be like, go watch this.
Okay,
All
for
right.
sure.
So do you want to do the summary, or should I?
I don't know as many character names like by heart at this point, so I feel like I would just be throwing people here and there. I can definitely chime in with into your summary and be like, "Oh, I thought that was a significant part."
All right, sounds perfect. So, Star Trek episode, The Outcast, and we do these on the fly, so that's free.
Okay.
It starts out with the crew of the Enterprise investigating an anomaly. These people, the Janai, who they point out from right in the beginning are gender neutral, or as we refer to it today, non-binary. And so they've lost 2 of their crew people in this anomaly called Null Space. And so the Enterprise is working together with the Janai to try to find it and then maybe rescue the crew members, which puts Commander Riker, who's second in command of the Enterprise, right into the situation, because he's an excellent pilot. So you're going to need like an excellent pilot, because you could get sucked in to this like null space. But then Soren, who's one of the Janai scientists, says, well, I'm an excellent pilot too. And at first he's kind of like, oh yeah, like you've never flown a Starfleet shuttle. And Soren's like, yeah, well, I'm sure I can figure it out. And so there's like this rapport immediately that builds. And so we have a bunch of like little scenes of the 2 of them working together and getting closer. One of the ones that was interesting was like in the shuttlecraft, they're working on some stuff, and he finally he's just like, look, I don't understand this whole gender neutral thing, so you're gonna have to like forgive me. And it starts this like really candid and like interesting conversation between the 2 of them. And I thought one thing that we can talk about is like how it actually kind of is a great teaching tool if you're like an alien and you don't know like how genders work. They do a really good job of explaining it here, so maybe 11-year-olds could benefit from this too. Ew.
This is like the tutorial that they make you watch in like elementary school for aliens.
This is kind of like the birds and the bees of Star Trek episode. So there's a lot of awkward moments as throughout their journey together, but it ends up that they also are physically attracted to one another. For Riker, this is something you don't know, Jared, but he's kind of like the what's like the word here? He's kind of like the F boy of Star Trek. Like pretty much every planet they go to, Riker's like, I'm down. he's DTF.
What number is like the Janai over here? Soren is like
it's so many that I've lost count.
Oh, wow.
We're like season. Yeah, it is deep.
And let's. I think we're like. I don't know if this is the next scene, but like you're talking about when they get together, and I think this is just after they're in the ship. that lunch when they have some pea soup. That was kind of interesting, just because of like the setting, and it just felt like they were like eating lunch, but also like at this like space nightclub. Where
That's
like
awesome that you picked up on that. So the like the starship goes out. I'm gonna like finish this summary, but the starship goes out on this long ass journey. It's like a 5-year at minimum journey, and they're going out into deep space, right? So they have everything. There's a mall. There you can get there's a barber shop. And there's this lounge. It's called 10 Forward. It's like the lounge. And like, oh, and there's another cool thing on Star Trek. It's called Synthehol, and we've discussed this at length on the show. Synthehol, the way it works is you can get drunk as much as you want, but as soon as you're like your adrenaline kicks in, the alcohol is nullified. So you can be drinking this all day, and as soon as like you have to work or like go to your battle station, you're sober.
Best
so they're
ever.
drunk all they're drunk all the time on the starship. So there's a lot. Yeah, so that's cool that you picked up on that. But it totally seemed like it turned into like that scene turned into a very like romantic scene. And then she's also, just to keep going, so Soren expressing its feelings. No. Darn it, I did it. I totally goofed on the gender pronouns. Just Soren. I guess you would just say Soren.
Soren's feelings.
Soren's feelings are against Soren society's like norms, and so Soren has to this is so hard. I'm usually a lot better at these summaries, I promise. So Soren has to hide it from well, okay, I'm gonna say her, because Soren, to go on the subject, Soren, even though their planet and their people are non-binary in their genders,
by a female actress.
Yeah, played by a female actress, but also the character of Soren identifies as female. So that's like totally like the same as how like in 1992, it would have been like, you know, being transgender at that time was like, oh my God, what is this? Like, this is like ground shattering type of stuff. Whereas like today, it's a lot more acceptable. So anyways, Soren, you know, has to hide. And so a colleague named, oh, I had it in my head. I think it's like Katal or Krital or something like that, comes over and walks in on them. And what would have normally happened is like, you know, they would have sat down and all three of them are hanging out. But Soren feels so self-conscious that she's like, okay, bye. You take my spot. And then like freaks out, which makes it super suspicious, and actually kind of ends up being what outs her to the other Janai. Anyway, so the null space stuff is happening, and this romance is happening, and it's getting more and more intense. And then finally, after they succeed in recovering the Janai, the lost Janai crew people, Soren and Riker are caught at this like celebration, like about saving the people from null space. And so Soren's caught and arrested, basically. And Riker's freaking out about this, and he goes back to the ship, and he's like seeking the counsel of Captain Picard. And this is another cool thing that you might have noticed, but like Captain Picard announces this thing called the Prime Directive, and he like lets Riker know, like, hey, we're not even supposed to interfere with like, you know, the affairs of other worlds. So, you know, I don't know what we can do in this situation. You kind of you kind of just have to deal with it. So he's basically saying that like there's not going to be any help. He has to go rogue. So that's what he does. And the episode turns into this awesome little like action adventure sequence where they, oh wait, I skipped a whole awesome part, which is the courtroom scene, but we can talk about that during the episode. So anyways, Soren is going to go through this like psychotherapy. And so Riker mounts this rescue, but he's too late. Alas, they must have a really like intensive program, because in one therapy session, Soren's already like, "Oh, I don't even know what you're talking about," like deuces. And so Riker's heartbroken, goes back to the Enterprise, and then I think that's it. I think I covered everything that happened in the episode.
That end of the episode though, when they kind of like zoom into his face and he's like, "You handled it," and he's like, "Yeah," and then you could just see like you're waiting for like a tear, and then the episode ends.
It does end super sad. All right, so that's.
But yeah, you missed the court scene, which technically, since this episode is based off of that, it really is like that's
it was like the biggest scene I know, and I totally
just skip that.
So let's just start talking about it from the court room scene. Like, there were a lot of interesting arguments going on. There was like the human perspective, the enlightened human perspective, which is like just let everyone be, right? Then there was the Janai perspective, which is like, hey, like this is what this is like a genetic aberration, like only 1 in a billion Janai like are afflicted with this and they want to be cured. And then there's Soren's perspective, which is like, no, I was born this way, like it's not a and it doesn't harm anyone, so why can't you let this aberration, if you will, be, right? Same, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. Like, this is kind of like in any, if we want to broaden it to just the rights of any like subset or subculture, like, not just focusing on gender politics or anything like that. I think this is like the biggest struggle that we go through as right now in humanity. So that's why it's like super relevant, because right now that's like the whole reason why, outside of religious practices, like it's the whole reason why people fight and get angry. It's like, everyone wants to be an individual, but then society kind of forces you to consider a normalcy, if you will. So that's that.
Yeah, I started watching the episode, and as I'm like halfway through, I was like, "Oh wow!" I was like, "Boy, did he throw one at me like a curveball right here!" I was like, "This is," and then as the episode got more and more complex, I was just like, "Wow!" I was like, this was 1992. It's like so far ahead of its time, and it's touching on like an issue that's now, and it's honestly, it's somewhat lightened. But back then, it was like almost forbidden to even touch on it. I feel like, it wasn't as widely accepted. So I think that was like a huge culture shock. But I think, that the whole point is like this acceptance and like discrimination and equality is obviously what the whole episode's about. It's just crazy how, something in 1992 is so relevant. And, we haven't made the strides necessary to really make it, a totally acceptable thing for, like what you said, like on all these things, like the whole gamut, not just, the LGBT community.
It's true. That being said, like the fact that this did come out in 92, I was a lot older. I was about 15. So, 15. I just can imagine 2-year-old Jared now. That's funny. It's like, oh yeah, still a baller.
No.
But in 92, when it came out, so I was in high school, and the reason, one of the things that this show came about was like at lunchtime there was like a group of friends that we would all kind of gather together and talk about Star Trek, not just Star Trek. There were like other shows. I think MacGyver was really big at the time, and so like I was definitely watching MacGyver, and then like I don't know. There were a bunch of shows. I can't remember. The only one I can remember is Star Trek, obviously.
Yeah.
But we'd get into these discussions, and I do remember this one in particular was like a really crazy discussion, because like some of my friends in the group were like totally like, that's disgusting. Like, and I mean, but I can't blame them. Like I had the same kind of feelings because I was brought up in a world that like, had those biases. And so, but this episode actually got me to like think of it from a different perspective. I tried to like tell everyone like, no, this is more like, I tried to make excuses for the episode or whatever, which I would never do now as an adult. But like at the time, I was like trying like to also grasp with the concept, and it was pretty groundbreaking then. But like with most of Star Trek, like one of the cool things is like you kind of hopped into this episode and like didn't really need to know anything about Star Trek and followed it like pretty awesomely. Like you caught everything that they wanted to give you. And TV's not like that anymore. Now like you have these story arcs that are like, if I would have to be like, Jared, you got to watch from the beginning or whatever to catch up. So one of the cool things about Star Trek: The Next Generation is there are these pinnacle episodes that you can just kind of introduce someone to and throw them in. But what I was going to say is that like there's this it gets better campaign, and it has gotten better actually, which is really encouraging. I mean, there's still like a lot more issues now than anyone could have ever have dreamt of, but that's actually a positive thing because it means that things are out in the open and being discussed that were never discussed before. So I think that like your generation is part of the like the movement, like to you growing up, I don't know, where you grew up. I mean, I do know where you grew up, but I don't know what it was like for you growing up. We've never had those conversations, but can you remember when you were like 15, like what was the big issue surrounding like society at the time?
Yeah, I mean,
and like I'm just curious how different it was from this, like was this an issue for you guys growing up?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like I said, more apparent now in 2018 versus, when I was growing up, the first 18 years of my life in Rhode Island, being in New England. The only close comparison, or like somewhat from like going from like something that wasn't as widely accepted to like an area where there's like, when I'm going from like a minority to a majority situation, for me would only be like in my high school. I think there was, 3 or 5 or 6, like under 10, like Jewish people, like not a lot. And then, I graduate high school and you go to University of Miami, and Miami is it's populated with a lot of young Jewish people going to college there. So that was, crazy, going from like these jokes and the teasings and stuff like that from like high school environment to an area where it just no one even says it because everyone is Jewish. So that was kind of interesting.
That's super interesting to me too, because growing up in Miami, like I feel like we've had this discussion before, but I feel like an honorary Jew because like I had a lot of Jewish friends growing up, and I'm like a lot of what we studied about World War II and like the plight of the Jewish people through genocide really touches deeply, and so I could never have imagined growing up like making jokes about Jewish people. It was like insane, like like to
and think
that
for the show, like I'm watching the show, and for me I'm drawing comparisons to either situations, real life things that I can kind of compare to the show, or also other shows that are like, oh, I've noticed a certain situation that I can relate back to. And like the close-up scenes of like Soren and Commander Riker really had like a Star Wars vibe of like when like I had like a Yoda type conversation, or like Obi-Wan, and that was like that. And then obviously the clashing of like these two different people remind me a lot of like Avatar.
Oh wow, great references. What did you think of like, do you think they pulled off gender neutral like as far as like the show is concerned? Like did you feel like these characters, like you couldn't tell if they were male or female, or do you think that like because they were mostly played by female actors that it did show through?
So it's actually funny. So as I'm starting to watch the show, like everything's super new to me. I have no idea what I'm about to dive into. So the first thing, and I honestly like just started writing down like some keywords that like first things that popped to my mind, and I just wanted to like share those. And the funny ones were like the first thing I had, and it's actually the first note after the opening credits, was like these foreheads in this fashion, and I was just like, what is going on? Like, but it was very clear that these people were separate from who was actually supposed to be on the ship in that regard, right? Like people with the uniforms, made sense that they were on the ship, and the other people were, there for other reasons. I did go into a little in depth. I don't know if I jumped the gun, but I went online and I just searched the episode and looked in like the first few articles, because obviously,
Nice.
I knew that this had to have like create some type of stir in the news just because of how the episode is run. But I did see that the guy who played, so the actor who plays Commander Riker, said that
Jonathan
he
Frakes.
thought, yeah, he said that he thought they should have pushed the limits even further, which is crazy to think about in that time, right? And it's 92, but
It's true.
still. And he said that they should have, the person playing Soren should have been more like a male actor.
Right. And then like identifying as female would have been even trippier. Like it's true.
Yeah. So yeah, no, like
But that's
really. So that
that's
would
a
have been
really
interesting.
yeah, and I really Jonathan Frakes is like he's gone on to direct Star Trek movies, and like that actor's like now he's directing the new Star Trek show too. He does episodes of that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so I think it's awesome because like kind of in the Hollywood bubble, I feel um like people in Hollywood tend to like push the envelope so much that I think that they're already like their mindset's like already ahead of like most people. So it's cool to hear Jonathan Frakes say that, even though today it's like NBD, like it's
For
like
real.
but this is pre Brokeback Mountain, where like major actors playing gay, heterosexual actors playing gay, just to prove that like to bring it to a larger audience, the subject and things like that. So it's pretty awesome that he thought that way. But the producers said that like that would have just put like that would have had like riots like starting and stuff like that. So I have to agree, growing up in that time, like I have to agree, like I think there would have been like an outrage, like had that happened. So TV was definitely not ready for it. Star Trek actually gets the credit though of the very first. This is a different Star Trek show called Deep Space Nine. The original series Star Trek gets the credit of the first interracial kiss because Captain Kirk and Uhura kiss on screen, and then Star Trek Deep Space Nine gets the credit for the first same-sex kiss. It's like two women make out on screen. So that was like the first show that did it. So Star Trek was always like
Yeah, I never that's enlightening to me. I did not know that Star Trek was the type of show that kind of like looks into these modern day culture issues and things like that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. So that's actually really cool.
it's super cool. I think it's a great show. Not Deep Space Nine, but Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like, and Star Trek the original series is like a time capsule. It's like good to show people, like if you're really into history, like I think it's hard to show a young person Star Trek the original series today because it's so far-fetched in terms of like just things that we grow up like understanding. But it's fun if you already like it's a fun show. It's like just a good time capsule of its time. But Star Trek: The Next Generation, I personally, if I had children, I would wait till they're 11 because I think that's like the good age to start. But I would 100% introduce them to Star Trek: The Next Generation and start them at 11 on season 1, and then by the time they're 15, they're on season 5. So I would do it like slowly, not like not like today's binge watching. Right? I totally ease them into like it'd be a family thing, like a weekly thing, like it was when it first aired. So that being said, like I think it was great for me watching this as a child because this episode in particular kind of like helped to get me thinking just about something that ended up being really personal to me, because on my side of the story, like for me it was about coming to terms with homosexuality. And so like back then, like when I was 15, I was like super I told this story the other day, but like in order to cope with my feelings, I actually would announce that I'm asexual because I thought, oh, it's like terrible to be homosexual, but no one really knows what asexuality is.
Right
So,
after this episode aired.
probably inspired a little bit by this episode. I can't pretend to like remember those kinds of details of my thoughts, but I wouldn't doubt that like that happened. But it's funny, like so I think that like shows like Star Trek that do push the envelope and like create conversations like this are really valuable. And I feel like Star Trek Discovery, which is the newest iteration of Star Trek. But it's super controversial because it's kind of like doing things that are like, you know, the fans are like, why are you doing that, you know? But like at the same time, I think it's great because now like we're in a world that's so different from like when this, well, yeah, when this episode aired, there was the internet, but it was like email and like, you know, IRC and like internet relay chat, and like not that many people had it. And today we're in a world of like instant like commentary about anything. So like which, you know, uh didn't exist back then when this came out. So like when this episode came out, like there was no Twitter reaction. There was a letter writing campaign. There was like, you know, that again, the public didn't necessarily know the results of, right? There were probably like Entertainment Tonight existed, so they were probably like did an episode on this. If you know, I'd be curious to see. But like there weren't a lot of different views to go to when this episode came out. So all you had was like the critics, like that rated shows and things like that. And today you go online and like you go to Twitter and you immediately understand like what the reception was of something that's put out there. So Star Trek Discovery is kind of faced with that. Like every episode that comes out of Star Trek Discovery, like immediately there's like a huge discussion on Twitter. And so
so how did Star Trek fans come together in a sense back in like 92? Is it just like more like trade shows and like fan visits and stuff like that?
Yeah, like it's interesting, like you're familiar with the concept of fandom, right? Like there's this whole thing like Comic-Con is like a culmination of a bunch of different, you know, and all these things. And like now you can be like fandoms always existed, but like nowadays it's like there's these like whole like crazy movements about it and everything, you know, that I don't remember. But back then, like we get like if like a bunch of us liked Star Trek, we would talk about it in school, like at lunch on lunch break. And then to meet the larger community, you went to, there were actually specifically Star Trek conventions. And if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves me right, like those were the only type of conventions like that ever at the time. Like comic conventions didn't really exist or anything else. And so Star Trek kind of created this whole world. So that's in crazy. A sense, like, yeah, in a sense, like back then, like, you know, I think like the subset that I belonged to that I was picked on was nerds, right? And now nerds are awesome. So it's like, but like back then, like, you know, nerds were like really picked on, and so like this is kind of like I think an interesting time because that, you know, like bullying for being like into things like in a nerdy or being nerdy, whatever that means, is kind of like a lot less, you know. And like I would hope that young Jewish people growing up where you grew up today have a different experience from the one that you had too, you know. Like I don't know if you've got I don't know if you've got like
that's what they use in the show, right?
So I wanted to ask you I have a bunch of questions for you. So first time ever watching Star Trek, do you like have any questions about the main crew? Can I go through any, like, do you know, like,
yeah. So like, you know, I definitely watched the intro. My first question was like, is that the same intro used on every Star Trek?
Of that, yeah. And so what you're watching
section,
it's basically the same. Like for every episode, you have that little space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of Starship Enterprise, you know, on its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds and new civilizations. So yeah, absolutely. Like that's the intro. And it was the intro. What's interesting about that intro is that Star Trek, the original series, said to boldly go where no man has gone before. And so when Star Trek The Next Generation came out, they changed it to no one has gone before. Yeah, exactly. So Star Trek The Next Generation from its inception tried to bring in women. And then another cool thing, so let me just break down the crew real quick. So you have Captain Picard. Awesome character. Like, in fact, I feel like if you ever want to like become a manager of something, like a good role model is Captain Picard. I try when I had leadership roles in my past jobs, I always tried to think like, what would Captain Picard do in this gnarly situation. And,
like how he tried to guide Commander Riker to, like, there's that, what was it called? The like,
oh, the Prime Directive, yeah, like
there's a Prime Directive that he shouldn't be going, but he did it anyways.
He's an excellent example of like a leader, and like and then they're all friends by this time in season 5, so it's awesome too, because like most office environments or workplace environments, you can't help but become friends with the people you work with, such as the case here.
That's right.
So there's Captain Picard, then there's Commander Riker, who you learn a whole lot about in this episode. Then on the bridge, did you catch a glimpse of the oh wait, during the poker scene, there's a bunch of people there. So you have Dr. Crusher, who you obviously met in the episode. She's like she's pretty prominent for that one scene, which where Soren's asking her like, oh, about Beverly. Women, and like, yeah, Beverly. She's totally awesome. I know a lot of young men had a crush on Beverly.
Oh, really?
Her name is Dr. Crusher, Beverly Crusher, so it's kind of perfect.
I wrote down her name out of anybody's name in the credits, or the opening credits, because I just thought that was amazing. Like, Beverly Crusher. Great acting name.
And then there's Deanna Troi, and that character. So in the poker scene, they're all playing. Did you see the guy Worf? So
yeah, I think so.
He's the obvious alien because he has like ridges on his head. Now that's have you ever heard?
I was gonna ask about him.
Have you ever heard of Klingons?
Klingons, no.
Okay, so Klingons in Star Trek are another alien race that's a very like kind of powerful spacefaring race. So there's like in the world of Star Trek, you have humans and a bunch of other aliens, including Vulcans, Andorians, and these aliens called Tellarites that form something called the United Federation of Planets. And you can kind of just imagine it's the United Nations, like it's pretty much, but of different worlds. Then you have the Klingons, and they're like a more warrior type people. And Worf, the character Worf, is a Klingon. In the original series, they were the enemy of the Federation, but now in Star Trek: The Next Generation, they're friends. Then we even have a Klingon serving aboard a Federation starship, which is Worf. But that's why he had like these views that were kind of challenging, because his people tend to still have like these like hard views on gender and things like that. Then you have Data, who's an android. He's the yellow guy, like the golden colored guy. So he's an android. And then you have Counselor Troi, who's the other lady in that scene in the poker scene, and she's actually, she's the ship's like psychologist, but she's also empathic, so she can sense what your emotions are. Then you have Geordi, who's in a couple of scenes. He's got a beard and like a visor across his eyes. He's blind, but the visor helps him see. And ironically, he normally doesn't have a beard, but there's like 2 episodes that he has a beard in, and you happen to have got the one.
I'm honored.
It's like Geordi's beard. And then who am I forgetting? Is there anyone else?
No, so this scene totally jumped out at me, because I'm going into watching Star Trek. The only things that are on my mind are like, okay, spaceships, space, like, the aliens. And then all of a sudden I'm watching, technically, an alien and humans, and they're playing poker and they're talking about Federation Day. And I was like, what's going on here? And then I was just shocked at like why this guy has a visor inside, like it's him, it's his face is part of it. And then like the forehead guy just reminded me of Chewbacca. I was like, this guy's got to be his like great uncle or something.
That's really funny. Yeah, so those are the main people, the main cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation. So you met all of them in this episode, which is another reason I picked this episode, because sometimes they like save budget and they don't have everyone on.
Well, this episode that was a very short scene. It was really all Riker and Soren, right? The whole show.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're right. It's true. But anyways, so you have these guys, and that's your main cast. So by now in season 5, like a little bit of So what's cool is that like you can enjoy an episode or watch it and like get everything you need, but there are things that like, you know, there are a lot of arcs that you're gonna miss out on. And but this is where we are in our journey. I wasn't gonna start you way in the beginning and then talk about an episode we already talked about. So but what's cool is that like you pretty much picked up on all the dynamics there. Were not knowing anything about these characters, did it make it like less enjoyable to watch the episode? Were there times like where you're just like, oh, I have no idea what's going on here and it's like not that great? Or did you overall still enjoy the episode?
There's a scene where Commander Riker is with, I don't know her name, but she has holding a little teddy bear.
Right,
And
Deanna,
yeah,
Counselor Troy. That's Counselor Troy.
okay,
Awesome.
that's Counselor Troy. Okay, yeah. So they're talking, and like that, it would have like I knew they had a history, right? That's what it seemed like.
Right.
So I didn't
Totally.
know about that. So that I guess that was the only thing is like you don't know like if something recently or someone has like a strong history of X, Y, and Z, whatever might relate to. So I didn't know that in certain scenes, and that one was a clear like you needed to know something about them too in the past in order to get what they're talking about here.
Yeah,
But
totally.
for the most part, no, I felt like it was nice to be able to dive into a show, enjoy an episode, and like, also I'm intrigued. Like, this was a drastic episode, right? A lot of stuff happened, especially touching on like these issues. So now all I really do want to like look into the movies and get like your input on, how to watch
Oh, right
the
on.
seasons properly and stuff. So
I'll give you like a starting point and maybe we could like get you in on a like maybe there's like a couple we'll get you in a future episode, but it'll be
yeah,
a different discussion. That's pretty awesome. I'm really pleased to hear that. Because like normally people choose like really action-packed episodes to introduce people to Star Trek because you just assume like, oh yeah, it's like candy, you're gonna love this, you know. Like, so I'm really pleased to hear that you were like, oh, this is pretty interesting, despite like a lot of unknowns being presented in the
for
episode.
sure.
Um, so I kind of think that what else did I have here? Let me check my notes real quick. Oh, um, so going back to the whole thing of like um you know did you think it's weird that like there was a whole planet of non-diversity? like, like-
I guess I could like. There's been a lot of shows. Clearly this was like one of the first, right? That like set
Mhm,
this
mhm.
tone. But I feel like there's a lot of shows that have this concept of you need to be pure and everyone needs to have a uniform and you have to abide by this certain set of like rules and regulations. Like I think of like The Leftovers, and there's another movie. I can't remember the exact name. I don't know if it's like The Giver or something like that, but it
Oh
was.
yeah, no, it is The Giver. That's a
It is The Giver.
great
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen a lot like this, but they've all come after this, right? So like this could have been like revolutionary for the time, which is kind of cool to see that. Um, to be honest, a lot of it, like a lot of the scenes to me, felt like it was awkward watching it, like the whole, and I guess maybe that was the whole point of it, right? Is to make it feel not normal, right? And not comfortable
Right.
because the whole
Right.
situation is uncomfortable. But I felt a lot of that, a lot of like, wow, like I feel weird watching this.
Was there any scene in particular that made you feel the most that way?
um, I just scrolled through. I had a couple notes too, but like when this is back to the lunch scene, quick snippet. But he was like, "Oh, those cold Alaskan nights." Like I
Uh,
was like laughing, like, "Hold on, like about Alaska?" Because at this point, like I don't know, like is Earth in this show? Like is that a
nice. Good
factor? I
point.
didn't know. So I thought that was funny. Um, an awkward one was when he tries to do the like analogy, or it's like a saying, and it's like the snips and snails.
Oh, and puppy dog tails. And
Like
then
that
she's like,
scene.
She's like, you have a tail. It was
And then
like,
like under that, I wrote, I've never heard of this ever. That's my notes. And then I put,
oh, you've never heard of sugar girls are sugar and spice and all things nice, and that's amazing actually that you haven't heard of that because it means you grew up in like a more enlightened time, but like without like these like um there's this scene that stood out on the same kind of tip where Soren's in the sick bay after she gets tossed around in the shuttlecraft, whatever, and she's talking to Dr. Crusher. I loved how like there were like I think it stood out because 2 or 3 times Soren's like, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm curious, which is a really great like I'm gonna start using that from now on when I meet someone who's different from me. Because I think it's great. Like, you're like, a great way to like get kind of like some awkwardness out of the way. But when she asked like Dr. Crusher about like the differences between males and females, and if like there was a gender that's better, like I think that it's cool to show like without like going crazy into the history of humans, like she kind of has to think about it, and she's like, well, I mean, there are like some physical differences or whatever, but like women haven't you know been seen as inferior in like hundreds of years, like it's a long time since, right? But then I thought, like, what did you think? Like, I thought it was interesting that Soren was like, pointing out, like, well, but you paint your faces and like, and all that stuff. And it got me really thinking about it. It's like there are actually, like I think a lot of people who are activists about like the idea of like equality kind of go really far and extreme, and they're kind of like get upset about things that like I think they shouldn't get upset about. And like I know I'm saying this from like a very male perspective here, but it's like I think that there are going to be things that like being a different gender, just inherently there are differences, but they're not any better or any worse. So, it's like like yes, everyone has the right to do, like if I wanted to wear makeup, for example, like it shouldn't be viewed as like something that's against my gender, right? Like that I shouldn't be doing. But at the same time, like there just is a tendency among males to not wear makeup, But I do like that Dr. Crusher points out awesomely. So she's like, believe it or not, even though men don't wear makeup or anything like that, they actually are trying to be more attractive. Like there are things that they do, and so I like that there was that balanced view. And so again, great teaching tool for kids. Like I just think it's like,
yeah, I mean, like that whole scene, I think touches on a lot of issues that still happen today. A majority, but the one thing I thought about there is like, the whole makeup thing. And then like, then she talks on like the very stereotypical, like the guys, plays hard to get and like they act mean. And then, her speaking on how like previously, women were inferior. It almost seemed like she went through like the whole history of like a male female like companion relationship in like a 2-minute summary.
it's true. It's true.
It's
So to
crazy.
give you a little background, Earth's still around, and again, humans are like the kind of, uh, you know, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, like I think just for budget reasons, you couldn't have a lot of aliens like walking around the ship, right? So just based on that, like most aliens look humanoid in some way. Like the Jedi, for example, they could have gone really far out with them, but it's hard to do that on a weekly, TV show budget. So they just put like interesting foreheads on them and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But humans are like the kind of the driving force behind the Federation movement. And what the Federation, again, all it is the United Nations. That's all you have to know. Like really, it's like not too much more complicated than that. um yeah, and so that's the backdrop that like you do miss out on not knowing Star Trek. But one last question, and then I think we should rate the episode, unless you have more notes.
No, you can go one last question.
Okay.
I'll through the notes real quick, and then I got my rating. I've been thinking about it.
All right. So the last question is like, if this episode were made today, what would be the issue that you think should be addressed in, like, what would you turn, this episode into a stage to address today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest one to just tap on right away is like politics, right? And I think it's like our current presidential situation and like, how a lot of people think about that and how it affects the economy and, businesses, how people overseas look at us. And I'm sure Star Trek would be great at finding, what that looks like outsiders looking in versus people feeling like they're stuck and that, we have, poor leadership. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I would think they would do.
Awesome. I like that. That's like something that's definitely, I think, on the agenda for Star Trek Discovery. So maybe that's the show you should start with and check out.
Nice.
Do you have CBS All Access for the sports?
I think so. Yeah. So I get everything.
So it's on there. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
All right. So your notes.
Okay. My notes. What I think favorite line in the whole show was when Soren, I almost said she.
No, but you can, because she identifies.
Oh yeah, technically, yeah. So I'm playing by the rules. Tell me about your sexual organs.
That's right. Oh yeah, I'm
like,
surprised that didn't make it to the top of your awkward list. That's funny.
Not sure that I guess it was also that was like when they were fixing something under the ship, right? It was like, oh, what a time. And then Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
Get any like back? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, Gene Roddenberry is awesome. Controversial figure also.
Okay.
But he actually, so he created Star Trek, and he was a TV writer in the 50s and 60s, and like as Star Trek became more of a phenomenon and like like a movement or whatever, he's the central kind of figurehead behind it. So like unintentionally, like Star Trek, he's like the guru of Star Trek. Like everyone like, praises, he's almost like been deified or whatever. But he was already dead by the time this episode came out. Although from my understanding, like he had kind of sanctioned and wanted to include like like naturally being a like a visionary and like a forward thinker. He saw that like at that time LGBTQ topics were going to be like something that was coming to a head, and so he like sanctioned the producers and said like, let's get this stuff in here. So that's probably why this episode actually even got made, is because edict or whatever. But yeah, Gene Roddenberry is awesome. His family is still around, the Roddenberrys. And so the only thing that I can think of for myself of Gene Roddenberry's that is of significance is Star Trek, but he's also done a lot of other shows. Like there's one called Andromeda, which a lot of people like, and it's even more far out. It's based on some of his ideas and things like that. So yeah, I don't know what to compare him to, like the Stan Lee. He's like what Stan Lee is to the Marvel universe, I guess. That's cool. But yeah, he's gone. A lot of the original actors are gone too. There's only a few of them left from that time, but naturally, because Star Trek's 50 years old.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and Captain Picard. So Star Trek is coming back with a Captain Picard TV show.
Wow.
So yeah, that's gonna be like in probably 2019 or 2020. So if you want to get it. No, same actor, but like 20 years after Star Trek: The Next Generation. So that should prove to be interesting. So if you really want to get into Star Trek,
I got over 50 years of catching up to do.
That's what I'm saying. Just start with Star Trek Discovery. I think it might be good.
Okay.
What else is in your notes? Anything else? That was a good question.
Um, let's
And there's
see.
a video. Oh, which there's a Starfleet Boy video about Gene Roddenberry that gives you a little bit more about him. So I'll send you a link to that.
Yeah, I guess I mean it's not really just in my notes. It was crazy how they even touched on like the use of pronouns within the episode, and just referring back to like what the episode stands for. And then on top of that, like the writers, like the wording in the like photon pulses, and like obviously the innuendos, like the snips and snails, and just the way I think the delivery of a lot of these words that are obviously a lot of them are made up, and like these space cadet words that a lot of they try to just like use from that type of vocabulary is hilarious and great at the same time because it like totally ties in. I think that watching an episode from 92, I don't like the last time I watched a vintage movie or a classic that from that from that time range, that date range rather, is I haven't in a long time. So it was like nostalgic and refreshing.
Wow.
But at the same time, like when we go to movies, they're in almost all of them are in 3D now, and they're these IMAX theaters. So a lot has changed. So I think that like it wouldn't gain points for me on like visual effects and stuff like that, but I can appreciate what they had for the time when they had it.
Yeah. It's totally, yeah, compared to today, it's not, it's like definitely like, close to 30-year-old special effects. So but I think that that's another interesting thing is like Star Trek had the budget back then, where back then that was pretty awesome for TV. We were all like, whoa, it looks like the movies.
Like how many other are all the other episodes really like same type of setting? Because so that's like close quarters, not much scene changes.
Yeah, you do get a lot of like, yeah, it's kind of like any TV drama, like you do have these like regular sets. The bridge of the Enterprise is like a big like place where you see a lot of things. There's a conference room that they all meet in, which didn't come out on this episode. You saw the captain's ready room, like his little office that you could step. It's like right next to the bridge, and you can kind of step in and
That's
have a
awesome.
conversation, yeah, with the captain. Then there's the 10 forward lounge. There's engineering, which you didn't, I don't think you see engineering in this episode. There's like a cargo base. So there are a lot of sets, but you're right, like you do definitely feel like you're like in a bottle, but there are episodes where they go down to planets and spend like a whole episode on a planet, and those are always really great, even though it looks like a set also. But it's like,
Yeah, and you got to see that a little bit when they when you went to try and get extract Soren. But you
yeah.
saw that like and it was kind of funny to see. It was like a forest type like place. Like there was a lot of like trees and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I thought one thing I thought interesting was like they totally like just found like a nice little LA ranch style home, and then like dressed it up with like future lights to make it look like it's like
I noticed that too. Yeah,
so,
it just looks like a very modern home.
yeah, like so that's kind of like what, yeah. So they're really inventive with their things, but it does look super dated at times today. But yeah, that's why I think a kid 11 years old not gonna notice these
Yeah.
things. Like,
Besides, I guess besides the theme of the entire show, the two things that like stood out to me the most as of like just like I saw it on the TV screen and I was like, whoa, weird, was the visor guy. Like, what's his name?
Jordy.
Jordy. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
that,
like,
yeah, I wasn't ready for that.
well, what's interesting about that too is that like the concept there was like, by the way, did you ever watch Reading Rainbow?
I don't think so. I gotta watch it.
Oh, it's such a good show. Um, Anyways, Levar Burton, the actor who plays Geordi, he was the most famous person on Star Trek. And then she didn't appear in this episode, but Whoopi Goldberg is also
Really?
a regular cast member. Yeah, so she plays Guinan, and they were friends, and that's how I think that's how Whoopi came on the show. She actually wanted to be on Star Trek, and no one believed her, and so she had to insist and be like,
I didn't know that either.
no, I
Wow.
really want to be on Star Trek. But anyways, LeVar Burton was famous because of a show called Roots, which they redid recently. But a movie, it was like a TV miniseries that came out that was really awesome in the early 80s or something like that. But then by the time Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, he was already famous for being the host of a kids TV program on PBS called Reading Rainbow, which I used to watch as a kid. So the idea behind the visor is that Geordi was born blind, and so the visor connects to his brain and like creates like he doesn't see like the way that someone born with sight, a human born with sight would see. It's more like, did you see the movie The Predator?
Yes.
It's so he kind of sees like that, like in the infrared spectrum, and kind of just like,
Cool.
he gets more information than like a human would. Like he can tell things about people's heart rates and stuff like that. So he's like a cyborg in a sense, or like that's like his, like he's augmented in some way. So that was, I think, like their idea of like an interesting science fiction spin on a disability, or whatever
For
at the
sure.
time. So it was pretty cool. But like nowadays, like we're growing new eyes and like
I know.
so like I don't know that like I don't know, like Star Trek set like 250 to 300 years in the future. So I think by then there actually won't be visors. Like people will just have like regrown eyes or whatever and stuff like that. So it's crazy how like some things that the show tried to predict are actually now just like far-fetched or weird.
Yeah, once they perfect whatever Google Glass or next product like that, yeah, we're close to it. It's scary.
Google Glass did not catch on, and I was surprised. Like,
Right? Unbelievable.
like people who wore Google Glass started like, actually that's like an example of tech bullying, because we're calling them glass holes. And so so that quickly went
But their
went
marketing
underground.
for them was, fantastic, and I think everybody was excited about it. But for whether it was the release or the price point, or maybe it was just the actual product.
Well, I think that like for me as a person that wears glasses, I was very upset that I couldn't get prescription Google Glass, because
Good point.
like, so
Yeah,
that was the thing about Google Glass that like was upsetting. But and I don't know if Google realized that there's probably a lot of people who would be interested who wear glasses.
yes, that's a significant
uh
portion of the market. Yeah,
Yeah, I would say so. And so that's that. And I was, and like I have Coke bottles, so even if I got contact lenses, I would still have to wear glasses because they wouldn't be strong enough to like let me, see well. So
oh man.
that's how bad I'm practically I'm practically Geordie.
Speaking
I
of
need
like observing and seeing things, in that scene in the show when they're playing poker, if you notice, the cards are like abnormally small.
I did not notice that. That's crazy.
I mean,
I
it
wonder
might
what
have
that
been maybe my perspective or the scene, but man, I already forgot his name.
Worf. No, it's
Yeah,
okay.
Worf.
You're not
Like when
obligated to
I
remember
don't know if
anyone's
he's
name.
supposed to be meant to look a lot bigger, but when he's holding the cards in his hand like this, I also think he might be holding like they're just really small.
I have to go back and like see that now. But you're probably right.
Let's see if I can find that.
The poker thing is like a regular they do it pretty regularly on the show,
Oh,
like
they do.
yeah, yeah, so it comes up a lot. It's like kind of like, did you watch that 70s show?
Yes, a
It's
few
the
times.
same as like that every time they would sit and do the circle. I feel like that's what this like thing is. It's like a good way to get like everyone's feelings, but without being like in a conference room. It's like Starfleet Boy. It's casual and informal.
It might just be.
Are you looking up that scene? It might
Yeah,
just be
because
how big
there's.
Worf is.
Yeah, it might just be how big Worf is, and his hands, the way he was holding the card, looked really
That's
small.
pretty funny. The things you
Funny.
notice. This is awesome.
So does Star Trek, like, like similar how Harry Potter, you go there, you can get some butter beer, like can I get some pea soup?
Oh, nice. Commander Riker's pea soup. We'll have to see. I bet there's a recipe online that has it. I would say that yes, you could. There was never a Star Trek land. I'm very upset about that because there's a Star Wars land being built and there's
Yeah,
a Harry Potter land. So who knows? We'll see. Maybe there's in the future there will
it
be.
falls under Universal or Disney, or
It's Paramount owns the film rights and CBS owns the TV rights. So I guess anyone could, like Disney could license it, or
yeah.
whoever wants to license it could probably license it. But
Yeah, I'm
I'm not
surprised they
sure
don't
that
have
like
one.
there was in Las Vegas a thing called the Star Trek Experience, and at the Hilton, which is not the Hilton anymore, the Las Vegas. So the Las Vegas Convention Center, right next door, there's like a Hilton, and if if you go there for a trade show, which I do go to Las Vegas for trade shows. Not saying I don't partake in the fun also, but like, definitely have only been to Las Vegas for work so far.
And the buffets.
I stayed at the Hilton and I saw this like lounge slash bar and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like something out of Star Trek. And sure enough, in the 90s, there was like a whole Star Trek experience that you could go to and you could have like alien things. Like there's Romulan ale instead of butterbeer, there's like Romulan ale and
That's awesome.
Klingon blood wine, so you could
I
have
gotta
the
want to try
whole
that. Yeah,
Romulan ale is easy to make. I'll give you some recipes for that. It's
nice.
just basically a Long Island iced tea, I think, because Long Island iced teas are blue, right? Like, so that's like basically what a Romulan ale is. But yeah, you could have all those things at this bar, and they were like, the servers were like dressed in Star Trek outfits, like if you were actually in a space bar. So that was kind of a cool thing that I never got to experience because I was too young at the time. It was in the 90s, and it sadly died, as many things did in the 90s. But I wonder if it could come back today.
I mean, it's still
Definitely Star
around,
Trek.
still going strong.
They definitely do at like San Diego Comic-Con and like a bunch of other conventions. You'll definitely get like a strong Star Trek presence. So if you ever go to one of those, like you can definitely like, I think they've had a recreation of the 10 Forward Lounge at a couple of them where folks can gather and have pea soup. I bet you that like, and if it's not on the menu, whoever's listening to this, you need to put Riker's pea soup
Yeah,
on
please.
the menu.
It's a must.
I feel like if I ever have, if I ever decide to open up a cafe, that like, it's kind of tough to do these things because like the licensing is pretty tricky, but I would definitely have like, Star Trek themed
Lounge
things.
vibe.
And now, because of you, Riker's pea soup is on the menu. So
Yes.
that's cool. Have you ever had actual pea soup? Because I think I've only had split pea soup.
Yeah, I don't think I have, and I don't know if I'm like trying to have it.
It
But
sounds
although
gross
if this
unless it's
becomes a
like
thing, then I will definitely try it.
nice.
Yeah, maybe
All
we start
right.
getting it trending like on Twitter, like
I know. I
Commander
love it
Riker's
if
pea soup hashtag.
that's going to be the hashtag for this episode. So that's
Yes.
pretty awesome. So Jared, it's time. Well, no, do you have any more notes? You had good
No, I
ones.
think I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
It's time to give it our rating. We've talked about this episode for almost an hour. I try to keep it under an hour because attention spans. So I usually go first on when I'm having a discussion with, because people don't trust my rating. So I'm going to assume that you're the same. You're going to think I changed it.
Can I ask
don't
you
know.
a question before I get your rating?
Yeah.
Is do you have an average of all of your ratings?
I tend to rate higher.
You do? Okay.
I tend to rate higher than the other guests on
I'm
my
not
show. There's
changing mine.
one.
I already have mine in my head, so.
All right, so I definitely tend to go higher than the average, but there's a guy named Gary who comes on the show, and he has a YouTube channel. He has a Star Trek YouTube channel called Trekker Prize, who always rates it way higher than me, so I feel really good because
Now
I'm
I'm
not the
nervous.
most outrageous.
I'm not going to change my rating, but
I'm not the most outrageous person on the show, but then my friend Humbert, who actually used to watch these with me back in the day in high school, he tends to be more conservative. And then there's Sean from Trek on the Tube, who also comes on this show, and he tends to be on the conservative side too. So we balance each other out. So
all right. Well, my disclaimer is that my rating system is very different than your rating system right now, because I'm going off of one episode, just meeting characters, mid-season flow. Like, I'm taking into consideration effects from a 92 show, so that's how I'm judging.
Yeah. No, I totally appreciate that you said that too, because I was going to kind of give a similar disclaimer saying that like your rating kind of is just like a go by the gut. Like for you, it should just be like a go by the gut. Like, what did you think of this introduction to Star Trek: The Next Generation? And I think that you should consider like in your rating, like, all the things you said, but also like, does this episode make you want to keep watching Star Trek? So that would be like a factor, I think. So anyways, from my perspective though, I'm rating it against all of Star Trek and also other episodes in the season and so on and so forth. So the usual. So I'm gonna go first, and my rating for this episode is a solid 7. And the reason I gave it that rating is because this is like the third time in my whole history since it aired that I've seen the episode. And it's not an episode that I would particularly like necessarily sit down and rewatch, but it's an episode that I remember. Like, it's not like a forgettable episode. So that's why I gave it a pretty, above middle, thing. And then obviously for all the questions it stirs, and evokes, and then also the just like the crazy relevance and how it continues to be relevant today, but for a whole different reason than why it was relevant when it came out. So I think that's why it gets like a pretty good rating. So that's that.
I came in at 6.5. And my reason for it is because I think it was definitely like a drama influenced episode because of obviously certain reasons. People feel a certain way, and then the people around them feel completely differently. So it creates that massive tension, which you kind of feel throughout the episode. So, drama free. And then obviously there's just a very small scene of action. And I think I was expecting to see, maybe like a little space battle, just a little bit. Didn't get it in this episode, but I'm sure that happens in other episodes. So
yeah.
So
I'll give you a space battle episode next. Anyways, go.
I found that I definitely found the episode like moving and enlightening. I think that like we said it multiple times, like ahead of its time, and like touching on things that are apparent in today's culture. So that was kind of cool just to watch something old that's just so relevant now. And I want to watch more episodes because I want to be a better podcast host, round 2, co-host rather, and help give my opinion on a future episode. And when this this channel goes viral and we get a TV episode and we'll go into a full studio with a full lounge setup, and pea soup will be on our tables with like the digital board in the background. I'm just dreaming big over here.
I love it. Thank you. That's awesome. Like, yes, all the things, all the things you said. Well, that's awesome. So a 6.5 is actually not a bad rating, and I think that all your reasons are valid. I'm not going to try to sway you up. I think it's a good rating.
Yeah, I just think there could be like, I bet there's some other episodes that are like a lot playing and maybe setting it up a season or like, you know, leading up to a bigger episode. And there's got to be some like episodes that are just like jaw dropping. And I know that this, you know, didn't really have that. I know it's a mid-season episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you know, definitely like those are the episodes where like those have way more payoff when you, I mean, all of these episodes have way more payoff when you've been watching it, you know, from the beginning. But I think that those kinds of episodes have a lot more payoff when like those jaw dropping ones are pretty cool. Yay. So, okay. Welcome to the Star Trek Club, Jared. I'm really glad that it piqued your interest. And
Right, can we do this?
Yeah, dude. Oh my gosh. Live long and prosper, and we'll see you next time. And oh, before we go, do you have anything to promote that for, you know, the limited audience that we do have may actually go to your website or endeavors or anything like that? Or do you have like a social cause or a charity or anything like that to promote before we go?
You can follow me at Jared S. Klein on all social media. And it's October, so it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So definitely supporting that cause.
Very cool. Excellent. All right. Have a good day, and thank you for being on the show. Live long and prosper.
Sunday fun day. Take care.